Welcome to the Iridas Podcast.
The creation of the world around the project is the more interesting thing versus the music in and of itself. Don't get me wrong, the music is tight. Like, it's really good. Like, I'm really good at rapping, guys.
This tea is called Gung Fu Toasty.
It is kind of toasty.
Yeah, it's kind of smoky. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Some good brain juice.
Yeah. I need to get back into tea. I don't have any tea making equipment.
Yeah.
I just have a little like French press at the house for coffee. Yeah, but like, I don't know.
Might be kind of weird if there's already coffee stuff
Right.
in it.
Right. I just feel like a fraud, you know?
You can get if you go to like an Asian kind of supermarket, they have like super cheap teapots.
Okay.
And yeah, because loose leaf tea is where it's at, man. Tea bags are fine, but
Yeah.
it's different.
It's very different. It's very different. I was consuming the most amount of tea when I was working actually in the office at Beverly Hills for IMG.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm working from home. But now this coming week they want me to come back to the office. Like, it's a different one in Santa Monica or whatever. But they always had like the cabinet stocked of like all my favorite kinds of tea, like bag tea though. I just do that every morning whenever I come in, man. And then when I started working from home, I was like, something's off, and I didn't figure out until weeks later. It was like, oh, I don't have any tea anymore. Yeah. I would drink so much tea that I'd start, then I have one with lunch, then I have one in that mid-afternoon, and then I would leave with one. Mm-hmm. Like, that's how much tea I was having.
And that's not too bad either, because it's not like coffee where, because I mean, certainly with me at least, if I had that much coffee, I'd be on the ceiling.
Oh yeah,
I'd be in orbit all day, every day, and I just wouldn't be able to sustain it. Plus, coffee makes me sick to my stomach, so I just can't have very much of it.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because yesterday I had pre-workout before meeting up with my trainer, and that's like an exorbitant amount of caffeine. It's not like a regular cup of coffee. Like, some people,
is it like one of those nootropic kind of pre-workouts?
It's not necessarily a nootropic, but it's like probably like 300, 400 like milligrams, I think, of caffeine or something like that. And they say that if you're consuming caffeine before your workout, that it helps with like the way that your muscles are growing because of the blood flow and stuff like that. I don't know the exact science behind it, but it's something to that degree.
I've read something like that it's like there's an effect that caffeine seems to have on exercise that's beyond just like making you feel like you can really get in there and tear it apart.
Yeah.
There's something else, but I don't remember what it is either.
Yeah. But like, just taking that, because I hadn't had it in I had probably like 3 rest days instead of my regular 2. And so because of that, I had like a regular dose, and I just felt like wired for probably like 4 hours after the fact. And I hate that feeling, because I know that, through all the like self-independent research or whatever, that I've dug around the internet to see if I can like get rid of that feeling. It's like, it's not possible, because some people were like, you can eat a banana or you can drink water. It's like, neither of those things have any effect on it. It's literally just something that you have to wait out. But the reason why people feel like shit when they are wired off of caffeine is because it's literally your body replicating the feeling that you get when you are stressed out. That's what, when you're over caffeinated, that's the exact feeling of it. It's like a stressor.
You're like right on the edge of the fight or flight thing.
Right.
That's
exactly.
what I feel like too. Is it's like, it doesn't make me feel energetic. It makes me feel in danger almost. Right. Not literally, but it just makes me feel like really on edge and really tense.
Right. And that's the thing too, is that the whole reason, or the whole point of even doing that for the workout, is so that you can, get yourself pumped up and amped up and use that adrenaline so that you can power through your workout. But then what happens if you do your workout and you still feel like that? It's like, oh, I feel like I have to do something. So man, really the quickest way to get it out is to just either keep working out or keep doing something physical so that it, flushes out of your system or it's actually being used.
Yeah.
So like there was one point where in the afternoon, like before I like when I had to like meet with like other homies or whatever, it's like I still feel wired, but I'm about to get in the car, so I don't want to feel stressed out in the car. So I'm literally just doing jumping jacks in my room to like flush out some of it.
Tire yourself
yeah,
out.
just tire myself out a little bit,
Yeah. So, dude, let's talk about this record.
Yeah.
I guess the first thing is we should tell people like where can they find it.
Yeah, so it's actually at both ajcrew.com and excuses.ajcrew.com. It's something that I've been working on for about like 4 years now, and the fact that it's done and out is still kind of bizarre to me because now it's like, all right, well, now what? So we're pushing it and we're promoting it pretty hard. But I want to still do a few more music videos in the in the interim. I'll probably be making some new music as well. But
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And the promotional campaign around this it's a really fascinating little piece of advertising. Let's maybe like tell people where they can find that. So every song on this record has like a written preamble and a video preamble that you can find on the internet. How can people get at that?
Yeah, so on excuses.ajcrew.com, it's basically like an intro video that auto plays when you get to the site. And I kind of give a short explainer on what the album is, what the experience is, and then what's going to happen from there. So when you scroll down, you enter in your name and your email, and it basically takes you through this automated sequence where every day you get a new email from me, and that represents a new song. So day one, you get track one off the album, and there's a full microsite that's dedicated to that song where you get a photo, you get a video from me, you get the lyrics to the song, you get the download of the song, and then an explainer on how to get rid of an excuse that relates to the theme of the song for that day. So it's a pretty cool thing. Myself and my digital marketing guy, Kyle, based out of Orlando, he works or started this company rather, Entrepreneur, and so I ended up finding him on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we had a chance to have a really good conversation about music and where the industry is heading, and he was basically the one who had the framework for the idea, and then I had the theme basically being a little bit more on the self-help, like self-transformation, motivational kind of themes, relating it back to the songs that are based in hip-hop and rap and all that. So the combination of all those things together, I think, made for something really unique. And I, just like I was telling you when I first got here, I think that the creation of the world around the project is the more interesting thing versus the music in and of itself. Don't get me wrong, the music is tight. Like, it's really good. Like, I'm really good at rapping, guys. And Matt and Iridas killed the arrangement on Expensive, and we'll get to that too. But not to discredit any of the music or anybody that contributed to that portion of it, but I feel like with the experience, you're getting something that not a lot of other people are taking the time out to kind of show their fans behind the scenes. And yeah, it's just, this is the most exciting part to me, just hearing people's reaction to it and them saying like, man, like I related to that so much, or man, like this got me through this, or that to me gets me a lot more jazzed than somebody that's like, man, that line was crazy or this was crazy. It's like I want to be a part of somebody's day-to-day routine, or if they go back to this experience or this time frame in their life and they think, oh, like this was happening and I was listening to this song by AJ and this part of the experience related to me because I was going through that at the time, like that gets me more jazzed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a story around all of these things that is potentially maybe more compelling to people than just any single, let's say, analytical element of the whole songwriting process, because you can have, and it's about more, I think I'm sort of putting words in your mouth, but it seems like it's about more than just like having a more meaningful interface with your fans. It's sort of like, okay, yeah, this might help create some kind of closeness with whatever little community it is that we're building, but it's also like people are going to look at this and it's going to be deeper than just like a cult around a persona. It's going to be like, this is an important idea that I need to spend some time in my own life contemplating.
Yeah.
And that's actually just a little bit of background of why I'm doing this, is because I kind of feel like a lot of we've lost this thing that, I mean, not completely. There's some really, really intelligent musicians out there with some really important things to say, but I don't know that we have in our culture at the moment the sort of institution that we had in, let's say, the 60s and the 70s, where you had people like Jimi Hendrix and John Lennon and like that would go on like a talk show or something and just talk philosophy, and they would go deep, man. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I agree with everything that they were saying. It's just like, when all of our ideas about like spirituality and morals and like what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a good artist, when none of those ideas are coming from actual artists, there's a hole in that conversation, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And one of the reasons that I'm so fascinated by your record is because I think it's a really important step in the right direction of filling that hole.
Yeah.
Especially in your videos, like you come across as so genuine, you know. You see a lot of interviews with musicians or movie stars or whatever, and they have this kind of persona that it never goes above a certain level of whatever it might go above.
Right.
But when I watch these videos, it's like, it's the same thing as just having a conversation with you, and it's like, it's honest.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah. And I tried to make it like that on purpose because I didn't want to say, put on a character, put on a front, to kind of relate to anybody. I feel like if I'm not going to connect with you the way that I actually am, then maybe I'm just not for you. And I can accept that. But I think that kind of life, or leading that kind of life, has to be shit. I mean, I'm gonna just be honest, like, having to wake up and think about what people are, saying about you or thinking about you, or, am I, in the right mood to put on this front today, or, you know what I mean? Anything like that. It's just like, I just want to be real with people. And then you brought up an interesting point about artists and the conversation around, morals and spirituality, and the fact that there aren't a lot of them that are speaking on that. I think one of the reasons, and it might not be the reason, but we're living in a new age where information is instantaneous and it's so widespread so quickly, that a lot of people are kind of hiding that aspect or that element of their personality because they're afraid to share that for, the potential backlash. And I would say that that's kind of our fault as a consumer too, is I can't tell you how many times that, I participated in conversations that, so-and-so said something in an interview that was wrong or something that I didn't agree with. But then the group think is all saying the same thing as, oh, this person is canceled, or this person is, not invited to the cookout anymore. Whatever the phrase or the terminology is, an immediate kind of retribution. And I think that rather than straight up saying that this person is wrong and it's definitive and it's absolute, maybe we should be taking more time to listen and try and understand this person's psychology. And again, if we don't agree with it, that's fine. But I think rejecting somebody completely, or the action of that and the consistent action of that in recent years, I think that that's causing a lot of people to hide in their shells. I'd rather see somebody have a legitimate change of heart than say all the right things at all the right times. That's just me. I want to allow a space for people to grow and change and figure it out. And if they're wrong and, they figure out, hey, I was wrong, and I apologize for that. That means a lot more to me than, somebody saying something wrong and then everybody telling them that they're wrong, and then they come out with a press release the next day saying, you know what I mean? Like, I want to actually see you do the work. I want to actually see what's actually going on in your mind, and maybe you don't have to immediately respond. Like, nobody has to respond within 24 hours if somebody says, or a group of people are protesting you or saying that you're wrong. Maybe you just keep doing your thing or whatever, and let those people be mad. And then maybe 6 months to a year later, like, revisit the subject or the topic and be like, you know what, back then I was wrong, and I can admit that I was wrong. The groupthink can be dangerous sometimes, man. I as a logical, reasonable person, a reasoning person, if I'm introduced to new information, then I want to be able to reserve the right to change my mind, rather than I have to think what everybody else is thinking at that moment in time and then just move and shift with the status quo as it is.
Yeah, we have a real problem with, like, we sort of form our thoughts about a public figure or even just an idea that somebody represents based on the soundbite. We react to the soundbite and we don't actually look at what was said a lot of the times. It's kind of maybe explains people's fascination with, like, some misguided political ideology or something like that, where it's like you can go really far down a rabbit hole of your own kind of thoughts about something that might turn out to be a bad idea just because you didn't really look at where that idea came from. And it's kind of like one of my favorite, I guess it's a podcast, is the Rubin Report. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily because I agree with Dave Rubin about everything he says or that I agree with his guests about everything they're saying. It's just like, I like the format of, he just lets these people talk. And if they're wrong, badly wrong about something, he doesn't even really necessarily interject all that much. He'll push back sometimes. But bad ideas should still be allowed to be put out there, because how else would you ever figure out that they're bad ideas? Right. If you have a bad idea, you're supposed to get it out there and then let everybody else come up with better ones. And that's how you get better ideas. If you're a culture that's interested in preserving itself, it seems to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess, and what you mentioned earlier also, that there's this kind of thread of personal development that runs through not just the marketing campaign, but the album itself. And I noticed, like, I got my notes here, and I noticed that there's a whole lot of songs that seem to me, at least, to have a theme of mindfulness. Yeah. And I know meditation is something that you and me have talked about a lot, but maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, how that inspires, like, your music making process and how that finds its way into the lyrics and all of that kind of stuff, because that's an interesting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for me at least, a lot of the experience around mindfulness and meditation very early on started when I became a fan of this show, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah.
It's like one of the best cartoons, one of the best TV shows of all time, in my opinion.
Yeah, go watch it. Anybody listening who hasn't seen it, it's amazing.
It's absolutely incredible. And I think that was kind of my intro to that world, at least at a point where I could understand what was going on, right? Mm-hmm. And then Real quick,
just a little bit of background on the type of spirituality that's put forth in that show. I think it's based loosely on Buddhist/Hindu meditation practices, which is where a lot of our meditation practices in the West come from. It's not necessarily about, like, the specific Buddhist or Hindu metaphysics. Like, they don't sit there talking about Shiva for 20 minutes of a cartoon episode for 11-year-olds.
They do talk about chakras, though.
They do talk about chakras, yeah. But it's mostly just about, like, finding focus and inner peace and mindfulness and, getting your kind of spiritual energy aligned in the correct direction and all that kind of stuff. So you were saying.
Yeah. So that was kind of like the intro, but then I didn't get really heavy into it until I guess very cliche until I moved to LA, where a lot of this stuff is prevalent. I mean, because previously when I was living in the Midwest, between both Toledo, Ohio, and Chicago. Not a lot of that world was really exposed to me. And I don't know if it's just because there wasn't an outlet for it, or it just wasn't the right environment for it. I don't know what it was, but, out here, I feel like the exploration of that is kind of the norm out here, to the point where if you have a conversation with somebody about mindfulness or meditation or what have you, it's just like small talk. You're catching up with it. Yeah, it's expected, and you're having a regular conversation with a friend. Whereas if I go back home and say I've been meditating a lot, like people would be like, "What does that even mean?" You know what I mean? What do you mean that you're meditating all the time? Like what? And mind you, I'm painting really broad strokes here. I'm not saying that everybody is like that,
of course, yeah.
But that was just my experience. So it informed a lot of the art too, because I feel like when I got into that place in my life where I was reading up on it and I was actually practicing meditation daily. I should be kicking myself because I haven't in a while. I need to get back into the habit of it. But when I was in that place, I started seeing a lot of shifts and a lot of mental breakthroughs, and a lot of things were happening for me that hadn't happened before. A lot of things were manifesting. And
just in the your kind of internal dimension.
Yeah,
because you said before that world hadn't really been exposed to, and I guess that could mean two things. It's sort of like the world of the community around exploring these ideas, whether it's apps like Calm and Headspace or books that have been written about it, and I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff on the internet that you can go to learn about these things. But then there's also that world hadn't really been exposed to me, the inner world that you sort of don't necessarily always have access to unless you actually go out of your way to explore it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's both for sure. And there was a lot of things that I went out of my way to go find when the topic was even broached initially. And certainly the books like Seven Spiritual Laws of Success, or Headspace, the app that you mentioned, or
Who wrote
even
that
just
one?
Deepak Chopra.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yep. And things like that. Yes, those were things that I either researched or that were recommended to me, and so that world was introduced to me for sure. But yeah, to your point, the inner world too, the world within yourself, that you find when you practice mindfulness, I think that wasn't something that I had tapped into either. And so I think that when you change what happens internally, I think that you start seeing external results, the world around you changes, It's really interesting. Now I'm starting to see a lot of examples of the lessons and themes from those kinds of books, or from that kind of mindfulness in the community around it. I'm starting to see a lot of examples of those morals and values happen in pop culture or in film and television. I was like, oh, they're very clearly giving a nod to that. There was this this movie trailer, and mind you, it's not the greatest comedian in the world, and probably not the greatest film premise, or for a bunch of different reasons.
It's
probably
really
not that great.
What it is.
Is this trailer that came out, I think, even just a day or two ago, for the new Amy Schumer movie. And it's this film called I Feel Pretty. And mind you, when I'm explaining this premise, it has so many different problems on its own, but I'm just talking about how it relates to mindfulness anyways.
Sure. Yeah.
So basically,
what are you talking about? Amy Schumer is amazing.
but yeah, I think we all know, or for those that are familiar with Amy Schumer, we're all familiar with that idea or that bit in her routines where, she's like, I'm not the conventional, attractive Hollywood woman, and that is funny, or, what have you.
Yeah.
And so the film's premise is about wanting to feel like she's pretty. And I guess there was an incident that happened where she was working out, and she fell and knocked her head, and basically changed like her idea of like how she perceives herself. It's basically like a reverse like Shallow Hal. Now that I think about it,
or Office Space or something like that.
Like, but it's her, and so it's like she hits her head, and then like now like when she like looks at herself, she sees like this very attractive woman, even though she hasn't changed physically. Mm-hmm. And so I say all that to say, and again, like explaining that, it's like there's so many different red flags in that premise alone. But but in explaining that, I think that seeing the trailer, I was like, what I got out of it, at least, or the positive thing that I got out of it, one of the very few positive things I got out of it, was that there was a moment where she changed internally, and that affected how, you know, she was treated by, you know, her colleagues, or how her dating, you know, life trajectory changed, and all these things. So it was like that inner confidence that changed her external circumstances. And so I feel like meditation and mindfulness is a big catalyst for me, and can be for a lot of others. I think if we, you know, talked about it openly and educated others about that being an option at all, because again, once you change your internal viewpoint and kind of coming to peace with yourself, I think a lot of other circumstances change for you.
Yeah.
And so talking about that on the album, I felt was really important.
That's actually a really cool segue potentially into the. So every on the website, every song has an excuse that it addresses. Mm-hmm. So the album's called Excuses, and it's about kind of like these stories that we tell ourselves about the nature of our minds and lives and histories and stuff that prevent us from doing what it is that we would need to do to get what we want. So like if you're talking about like you're a, let's say, unconventional looking woman, and you have this idea of this person that of this shape that you would like to occupy, let's say. Not really saying anything about whether or not these are good or bad, healthy things. It's just kind of like, yeah, this is a thing that happens with people. Well, you could hit your head and look in the mirror and just like see that thing, or you could align all of your efforts to becoming the best possible version of that potential that you see within yourself. And the excuse for the first song, the first song's called Have You Ever? And the excuse is, I just don't know what I want. And it seems to me like maybe meditation is a way that you could sort of help focus that a little bit.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is it's not such a good thing to have a nebulous idea of what it is that you want, because if you keep it really vague, well, it makes things easier in some ways, because if you keep it vague, then you don't feel the weight of responsibility to go and get it.
Yeah.
But also, if you keep it really vague, then you never get what you want.
Right.
And that's kind of hellish.
Right.
If you do it for 5, 6, 7 years. So you got to figure that out.
Yeah. I think having that finish line in place is more important than the steps that you are choosing to take to get there. Because when you can clearly see where you want to end up, then internally, whatever actions that you take from that point on, they're going to reflect that. Whether or not, you know, that dialogue within yourself is like, am I doing the right thing? Is like, well, if you have the intention of getting there, I think any step is better than no step. And the idea behind I don't know what I want, it's restricting yourself or holding yourself back until you know, and then you make a decision. It's like, no, just actually do something. And you know what I mean? It's the momentum forward is going to get you there. Not, I need to make all the right moves at these exact times. You know, it's not Twister. You know what I mean? It's a game board where you're moving forward. And sometimes you might like get a card and it knocks you back a few spaces, but at least there's some kind of, you know, momentum there.
Yeah. I like the metaphor of a marble sculpturalist.
Mm-hmm.
I think it may have been Michelangelo, and I apologize if I'm misquoting this, but said something along the lines of how like every block of marble has a sculpture in it already, and you just kind of have to figure out what that sculpture is. So you have a cube of this white rock that, and you start to chisel away at it. Mm. And then maybe you chisel one spot and this big chunk comes off all at once. And you could sit there and be like, oh shit,
yeah.
You know, I just ruined my sculpture that I thought was going to be a flower or something. But then it turns out that big chunk just came off and revealed this other little like spider crack thing. I'm not a sculpturalist, I've no idea what I'm talking about. But like Maybe now it's supposed to be a different sculpture than you thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So maybe the better way of doing it is to just kind of chisel away at this thing until it reveals the shape that it is best suited for.
Yep.
And you can work on, let's say, for a year, this sculpture. So you chip away at it, and it doesn't even look like anything for the first 6 months. And then you chip away at it for another couple of months, and you think it might look like something. But then you work on it some more, and you realize, oh, it's actually not this thing, it's this other thing. And it reveals itself to you. It kind of tells its own story as you're working on it. And that's kind of what it, at least at moments in my life when I feel like I've been moving in the right direction, that's kind of what it feels like. It's like it's being revealed to me. It's not something that I'm really mashing on all that hard, because every time that I've tried to do that, it just blows up in my face immediately, you know?
Yeah. The metaphor of the marble, the whole time that you were explaining that, I kept imagining this episode of SpongeBob where him and Squidward are like, yeah, they're like sculptors, like marble sculptors and stuff. Anyways, for people that know SpongeBob, they know that episode. Anyways, it's yeah.
And I want to clarify also, I'm not saying don't work hard. I'm just saying work hard on the things that work.
Right.
So then, then the next song called "Save Child" is I'm messed up because of my childhood, and I think that's where so many people's roadblocks come in. Is that you have traumatic? Everybody has traumatic experiences, and not all traumatic experiences are created equal, obviously. Right. But you can really, really disrupt yourself by saying, I need to heal from this before I create my art, or before I start my business, or before I go to this job interview, or whatever it is. I need to heal the trauma of my past. And there's this wonderful book by Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art, in which he says something along the lines of, well, the best way that you can heal from those things is to go make your art, or to go get that job interview, or to go start your business, because that's self-actualization, and what could possibly be more healing than that? Like, isn't that the whole point of healing? I think he actually says those words. Isn't that the whole point of healing?
Right. And I do think that art is a very strong component of the process of healing. I mean, for me, this was an album that came out back in 2012 that I did. Is this project called The Reality of It All. And there's a song on there called Fatherless Figures. And I had, a pretty tumultuous upbringing. My father passed away when I was 6, and my mother remarried, and then they got divorced when I was probably 13, 14. And so I never really had a consistent father figure in my life. And I felt like that absence, because of that absence, there were things that came up later in my life that manifest because of that. But, also, I think that, again, the idea behind the excuse of I'm messed up because of my childhood, I'm not saying that it's an excuse from the standpoint of, oh, that's bullshit, that's a lie. Because some people actually, just like you said, some people actually do have trauma that they're still facing, in the present time, and not all trauma is created equally. And so healing is necessary. But I think the act of doing something, creating something beautiful in the midst of that, I think that's a lot more powerful than the trauma that you actually experience. And Will Smith said something pretty recently on Instagram where he was talking about taking responsibility for what happens to you. And he made the very clear distinction that taking responsibility does not mean that you're saying that it's your fault. Mm-hmm. You're not assigning fault to yourself for somebody else hurting you, because everybody knows that that's ridiculous. Yeah. You're not responsible for somebody else's actions towards you. It's, okay, this person did this thing that affected me, but I'm going to take responsibility from this point on of what happens to me now. So I think that's where, the idea of saying that it's an excuse comes in. It's not that we're giving any validation to the negative shit that happened to you, or that we're assigning fault to ourselves for those things happening to us. It's us saying, hey, now we're responsible for our lives from this point on, and we should be making the most of it. And if you're not doing that and you're holding yourself back from that, then there's something wrong.
Yeah, yeah, and you can use that. Every trauma, I think, is a potential for growth.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's kind of what the song is about a little bit, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a lyric in there. I wrote down this lyric. It says, they say I've changed, but they're really just too shocked to listen.
Yeah.
And I think that's that calls to mind, because I've been reading a lot of like military history lately, and like there was this whole time in the 20th century before we understood about PTSD and stuff like that, where these guys would just have these unbelievably horrific experiences. Like the trauma of most people's childhood, even rather severe childhood trauma. It's like, yeah, it can get really bad, but getting shot at and watching your friends get blown apart and just like all the horrible things that happen in like World War I and World War II, that's dark.
Yeah.
You have to take your imagination to some seriously unpleasant places to still not have any idea what it was that those guys went through.
Yeah.
And they would come back, and we just didn't really have the science or the kind of awareness or whatever to understand what had happened to these guys. And some of them were just screwed forever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they didn't get any kind of help, they would lose their minds. And that's an unbelievably sad story, and I would like to think we're better at dealing with that now than we were in like the 50s. But the other thing that happened is there's this utterly terrifying book called The Forgotten Highlander, that's by this guy, Alistair Urquhart. I think that's how you say his name. And he was a prisoner of war in maybe Japan in World War II. And just tells this unbelievably horrible story about he was a prisoner for a few years, like 2 or 3 years, living in just unbelievable conditions. Like they weren't allowed to have clothes, they weren't allowed to have any kind of sanitation. They were working in the jungle, so that they all got malaria and gangrene and fungus and leeches and just all these gross stories. And then they all got like herded onto a boat and packed in there like sardines with no light or anything like that. And then the boat got blown up because they didn't put the little paint on it that you're supposed to put on civilian targets. So an American submarine came and blew him up.
Dang.
And then he's like 100 miles away from Nagasaki when the bomb goes off. So he's only like 20 when this stuff is happening, because he's a soldier.
Right.
You know, he probably enlisted right out of high school or something.
Right.
And what does he do? Well, he goes home to Scotland and then opens up a medical practice where he spends the rest of his life helping people. So like, where does that come from? That's what I might seem naive of me to say, but I really think that music does a pretty decent job of telling some version of that story.
Yeah.
Because a profound piece of music can take you to some horrifying places in your own cognition. If you're sensitive to things like this, go and look at a piece like the Sixth Symphony by Mahler. And if you come out of that piece without having feared for your sanity, go listen to it again. Go listen to it again until you get that from it. I'm not saying that listening to a record is the same thing as being imprisoned by war criminals.
Right.
But it can have similar effects on your imagination. And if that's the place that we're creating music from, then you kind of need to explore all those places so that you have something to say about those things.
Right. That's actually an interesting point too, because I think that an underlying theme, and it's not really so obvious, and I'm not really sure if I talk about it in the experience directly, but indirectly, something that was going on in my mind during the creation of the album, and just what was going on in my own personal life when I was writing it, is kind of the realization that whatever is occurring in the mind is reality, and it's unconventional in the way where we're awake, right? this state of being, you and I talking, us recording this podcast, this is us awake. Mm-hmm. But when we're asleep, with the air quotes, occasionally we'll have dreams and we'll feel just as awake in those dreams as we are right now. Why is that? What's the psychological, no, forget the biological components that are happening that makes that happen. What's happening in your spirit? What's happening in your mind that makes you believe that you're just as awake while you're sleeping as when you're actually, quote unquote, awake? And it just led me to this thought, and this belief that I hold, and I'm not trying to preach it and say that everybody should hold this belief, but it's just the way that I see my own reality, is that whatever is occurring in the mind is reality in some way, shape, or form. And there have been, research studies that have been done where they'll hook up, athletes to, all this like mental reading equipment, where they'll have them literally physically run a race, and they'll record their time, and then they'll say, like, see, all right, these waveforms are happening at this point, da da da.
Oh, so they'd like hook them up to an EEG or something like that, or
right.
Whatever those machines are actually called.
Right. And so they do that physically, and then it would come out a certain output, and then they have them do it again, and then say, run this race in your mind, and then the output would be damn near identical. Again,
that's
cool. Why is that?
That's cool.
So.
And we know this works too as musicians. So I mean, I teach a fairly large number of like kindergarten through 12th grade age kids, and a big part of what we do is we get them ready for competitions that sometimes involve a sight reading component. Like they'll be in the room with the judges, and they'll get a piece of music that they've never seen before. And they have to just like sit down and play it. And they always give them like a couple of minutes to like peek at it first. So what I tell them, and what works really, really reliably, is if I say something along the lines of, because they're giving you this amount of time, and these examples are generally very short, we can train you to the point where you will be able to perform this entire example in your head before touching the instrument. At which point you're not even really sight reading it anymore. You've already played it once. So even though you've only looked at it for 90 seconds, well, I mean, the thing's only 30 seconds long. Mm. So then when you play it, you have like all this extra confidence, and it makes a huge difference in my students. Like when I don't tell them to do that, and when I just kind of like let them at it before I knew to try this. And then when I started telling them that, it's like night and day different. The visualization is hugely important for performers.
Yeah, absolutely. And athletes too.
Yeah.
I mean, not going back to that specific example of the research study, but even like basketball players, mm-hmm. They'll visualize themselves doing free throws.
Yeah.
And for the people that, visualize that along with, practicing, they perform much better than those who are just shooting in the gym without visualizing and thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense too, because whether it's athletics or music or any dance, mm-hmm. Which I guess is kind of a little bit of both. All of these things are your body fundamentally. And I think one of the great lies of our culture in the moment is that most people are under the impression that they have a body and a brain, and that those two things are distinct from each other. But your brain is actually quite distributed throughout your body. Your central nervous system is not located only in your head. How would that even work?
Right.
So when I don't really know how deep the science goes behind this. I'll have to get some actual scientists on here one of these days and talk about this stuff. They can school me on all the inaccurate bullshit that I'm saying right now. But it seems to me, at least the way that I would intuit it, is like when you're imagining yourself doing a task with your body, it centers you in that place as opposed to in your head. And I know this a little bit as an athlete too. Like when I would do like martial arts competitions and stuff when I was a little kid, the coaches would often say something to me along the lines of like, you're thinking about it too hard, meaning that you're over conceptualizing it with the thinking part of your brain and not so much the motor part of your brain. It's like, no, here's the target, put your foot there. or put your elbow there or whatever. Stop thinking about, it's like trying to think about riding a bike.
Right.
Like that you go to those science museums that they operate all the joints independently and nobody can ride the bike when they do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really strange how the mind and the body connect sometimes. Yeah. Cuz it's almost like just to your point about overthinking it, thinking about the Nike slogan, just do it, right? There's I feel like that it isn't just doing it for the sake of doing it, or doing something without thinking about it. It's like the balance between thinking about how you're going to execute and then doing it without hesitation. I think that's the longer form. It's like just do it without hesitation. So
yeah, like it axiom of older generations is when opportunity knocks, make sure you're well dressed when you answer the door. Just do it doesn't mean I've never done a deadlift before, now go deadlift 700 pounds.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
But if you would like to deadlift 700 pounds, start with 50 or whatever, and then do 55, and then do 60, and then do 65, and then eventually you might get that 700 that you want. That's just doing it. That's getting after it.
Right.
Man. You want to do the next song?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next song is called Passport. And the excuse is to feel happy, I need to be in a relationship. So that sounds personal.
A little bit. It wasn't anything that I was going through personally, but I know people that have said that to me and I thought that it was strange, and I never really understood the mindset behind it until a few more people had explained their personal stories to me. And I think that can come from a lot of different places. It can come from abandonment issues. It can come from, wanting the validation of somebody else to feel like your purpose is validated. A bunch of different things like that. But yeah, the song, I think it's funny. Some of these songs were created before the excuse was, and I didn't really know that it was connecting to an excuse until after the fact. Right? So like the way that I wrote this song,
it's like that sculpture thing again. It shows up later, later than you want it to, probably.
Yeah. And it was so strange with this one specifically that, the song came out the way that it did. And this is going back to like just doing it, right? Sometimes I'll write a song and I'll do what I feel is right in the moment. And then if it sticks, it sticks. If not, I might go back and revise it. But for the most part, I feel like if it doesn't come out right the first time, then it's not meant to be, because that's bullshit too. But usually you'll know if something's going to work, the first, one or two times if you like try and compose it and arrange it. Like when you listen to the final version of that first or second try, usually you'll know if it works. And this is one that worked. But I wasn't thinking that heavily into how does this relate to me? How does this relate to something that I've gone through personally? It's like, oh, I'm just making the song. This is what this character or what this person is saying in this time. And while it didn't, relate to my, again, direct personal experience, I realized that it had related to people that I had conversations with. And it came from like a lot of the lyrics, especially like the chorus saying like, to this girl, like, stay around, it when you really examine it, outside of the context of kind of like the bubbly, poppy production, it really comes across as needy. It sounds like somebody who's very needy. And so I was like,
which is absolutely not attractive.
Right. It's very, very much not. But it's it's a quote unquote fun song. But, there are a lot of times or instances where I think it makes it more interesting to put a very unorthodox or unconventional song on top of something that's happy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because then it's like, oh, wait, am I really understanding this correctly? Or, am I not looking past the surface level? another perfect example of that is like something like Born in the USA. It's like a lot of people
Springsteen,
thought,
right?
yeah, a lot of people thought it was like, oh, this is, or some people still think that it's just a straight up pro America song.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Not exactly.
It's not exactly that. Is, you know, speaking from the perspective of like, you know, war and questioning whether, you know, it's valid. Like, what are we doing? What the hell are we doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but this is something that it's so exciting for me to explore because I make primarily instrumental music, and you can do metaphor and you can do narrative with instrumental music. It's a little bit controversial how that plays out, and it's been controversial for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But with lyrics, it's not at all controversial. I mean, it's like what you're describing is kind of like Lord of the Flies or 1984 or something. Like, is Lord of the Flies a book about a bunch of kids marooned on an island? Not really, you know? So there can be all these layers to words, just like there's layers to the instrumental bits of the music itself. Like there's different voices coming in and out, and you know, bits of counterpoint and different harmonies, and any piece of music. I heard this really clever definition of it by, I want to say, Jordan Peterson, that I think he said a piece of music, what it's doing is it's causing different levels of consciousness or different levels of reality to interface with each other, which is, you know, that's a little bit of a step up from usually like music is organized sound. Okay, right. Yeah, we're a little tired of that one,
right,
I think. Right. But different levels of consciousness communicating with each other.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's deep.
Yeah, that's... I don't even really know what else to say about it besides just like that it makes perfect sense to me, and I wish I had a better idea of exactly why.
Right.
But how that works with lyrics is it is additional layers that are simultaneously much more easy to discern for the listener, because I mean it's English, and I'm assuming most of the audience is going to be English speakers. So it's like, all right, these are words that I understand. I can look up the lyrics, and there's a rhyme scheme that's fun to follow along with and stuff. And especially the way that you do your hooks and stuff, it's really easy to sing along with, and it's kind of fun to listen to on that level. But it's also like, you're talking about some serious shit.
Yeah.
And there's a quote from the little journal entry that accompanies this song. It says, "When you focus on something you don't have, it can get you down. This mental state then seeps into your subconscious, which you continue to validate and enforce through physical body language that conveys things like a lack of self-confidence." And that's maybe goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about before, where it's like, if you orient yourself in the wrong way with your desires, whether it's for romance or success or whatever, it affects so much more than just whether or not you'll be successful. It affects like everything about the way that you're perceived in public, like posture and all of this stuff. When you adopt the stance of neediness or entitlement, that's a physical stance.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it looks like slumped shoulders or something. I need to sit up straighter.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
Like, as soon as you said posture, like my back started like feeling like tired and
Yeah, man, that's cool.
Yeah. And like watch how people walk down the street, man. Like you know, forget all the people that are like walking down the street and looking at their phones like they're just idiots. But myself included, I do that too. So, you know, I'm not excluding myself from that. But you know, there are some people that literally like they walk down the street and they have their head down. Why are they not looking forward, or why are they not looking slightly up? And it's like that's a physical manifestation of something that's going on internally. It's like I'm not supposed to look at these people, or like I'm afraid of looking at these people, or maybe I'm just too into my shoes. You know what I mean? But you know, people show themselves in the ways that you don't really think. Some people have like nervous tics. You know, if you bring up a certain subject, they'll be like, they'll be like scratch their face, or
bouncing their feet around or whatever.
Right.
And it's especially though with the head down thing, it's kind of like the head up, chest out posture, like the one that every chiropractor says that we're supposed to have. Like, they're right about that.
Right.
That doesn't just come from medicine. It comes from just thinking about how you want to present yourself if you would like to be seen as competent. And it's sort of like if you're, and this maybe goes back to a little bit of what the song is about with regard to relationships, and specifically pathological relationships. where you can have this attitude with your romantic partner where you're not really exploring anymore. You need to, if you want a relationship to be working, you kind of have to be exploring the other person constantly and exploring the world together and also separately, and be continuing to grow and develop as people. And then when you get that kind of thing of like, just don't leave, just don't go, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, we know that it would be really sad to have a breakup or a, falling out of a friendship or something in a family or whatever that's like that.
Right.
But if you conduct yourself in a way that just is like super trying to be safe against that possibility, then you're probably also neglecting to develop in other ways as well. And it's actually making it more likely that your partner is going to lose interest in you.
Oh, absolutely. Because at that point, it's almost kind of like, well, the world isn't interesting if you're not here, which I think is also really dangerous.
No, yeah, the world is plenty interesting.
Yeah, it's very much interesting without one specific person in your existence. And I think that once you acknowledge that you're in that state where if this person isn't present, then you don't have interest in participating in the world or exploring the world. That's like something that you should probably see, a therapist about. Like, also, like not trying to be funny at all, but it really does get into that dangerous, psychology, and again, it could be for multiple different reasons. I see a lot of instances where it's something like the song, and the reason behind it is abandonment issues. And I think that one is really tricky too, because the other person can see that in some instances, and they don't want to feel like they're the one that continued this cycle of abandoning someone because they know that they've been abandoned. But also this person is like so clingy to the point where it's like the other person is like, I have to get away from myself, like as a self-preservation thing. And so even though they don't want to, inherently that cycle continues because they, how to survive will have to leave that situation. And I think that's unfortunate that, the people that are experiencing those abandonment issues, like sometimes they're just like, they lack that level of self-awareness. Is like, that's what it is. My driving people away, and again, not like assigning fault or anything like that, but in the instance of, if I'm driving somebody away, I can't see past my own self to say, maybe I should just care about myself, to the point where other people would want to be around me rather than, try and latch onto them for dear life.
Yeah. And that goes back to kind of integrating the trauma too, like what we were talking about earlier. If you have a bad experience of anything in your childhood or in a relationship or whatever, it's kind of incumbent upon you to figure out how you can use that experience to grow as a person. And sometimes that actually involves doing things that might not seem like they're the right thing initially. Like if you're kind of in this place where you're stuck with a person that is heading down the wrong path, it takes a little bit of brutality almost to come up with whatever it takes inside of yourself to say to that person, you are headed in the wrong direction. And it takes something even more what feels like dangerous maybe to say you're headed in the wrong direction and you're not taking me with you. But it's also, that's a much more powerful place to grow for yourself, but also to grow for that person. It's much more humane, I think, to get that out with people in your lives that things aren't going so well. Because if you don't, they might take 10 years to figure it out, but if no one says this to them, then they'll never figure it out.
Yeah. And
that's kind of a mean thing to do to somebody, just neglect to tell them that they have a problem because it makes you feel uncomfortable. That sucks.
Right. Right.
And the other thing is that this takes place over time. That is, I said it might take 10 years for them to figure it out. It might take you 10 years to figure it out too. Right. And we all have things that are going to take us 10 years to figure it out. And that's maybe a good segue into the next song. The next song is called "You Know Me," and the theme is break time.
Yeah. So in the experience, I have like a couple of days where I assign breaks, just because I think the process of self transformation is it's so draining at times, to the point where, you know, you kind of do need to like just take a step back, you know, because just like any other work, whether that's getting in the gym and working on your body, or getting into the office and working on a project with your colleagues, or if you're an artist and you're working on a project, um, stepping away from things after you've been at it for so long is probably one of the healthiest things that you can do. And changing that dialogue internally is no different. And working on that, working on yourself internally is no different. Practicing mindfulness is, you know, it's no different than any other kind of work. It's self work. It's probably the most intense work that you can do. So I felt like it was important to have those days in the experience to like let you know, it's like, hey, it's not gonna be every single day we're gonna like, you know, break down an excuse. Sometimes we're gonna just take a break, and then we're just gonna reflect for a second. And that's kind of what I feel like meditation represents. It's like taking a step back and reflecting, and you know, figuring that out for yourself and seeing what's occurring and what's not, what your mind gradually, you know, drifts to, you know, on a natural basis. If you're not like, you know, if you're not engaging with any stimuli, what does your mind actually go to without you thinking about it consciously?
Yeah. And can you watch this without getting all judgmental and weird about it?
Right. Yeah. Can you not judge yourself? Yeah.
And then it's also like it brings up a really good point that progress is non-linear. I mean, if you're working on a piece of music, that's, I mean, might be a foregone conclusion at this point in this conversation, but making music is like a metaphor for life, in that it's not going to be a linear growth.
Right.
One of my favorite records it's called The Empyrean. It's by John Frusciante. And the subtext of that record it's pretty extreme. Like the whole journey of personal development is almost like a metaphorical, a repeated set of metaphorical deaths and rebirths. If you have something that's in your life or in yourself that isn't serving you, that part of you has to die for you to move past that. And if that doesn't terrify you, it probably means you've never had this happen yet. It's a scary, unpleasant experience, but it's absolutely 100% necessary. So like success, whether that's, you know, just trying to become a better person, or to, you know, put out a work of art, you know, release a record or write a book or something like that, it's not going to go straight up in a straight line. It's going to go up, and then it's going to crash and burn. But then when you come back up again, it's going to go even higher than it was before. And that's why it's important to take breaks.
Yeah. It's very important.
So the next song is called Vibes. And the excuse is, I was in a bad place. And the song seems to me like it's about like negative thought loops.
Yeah.
And just like shitty self-talk.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think it's definitely that. And then you know, the song in and of itself, it covers over the span of 3 verses in 3 different instances that happened to me when I was living in Chicago. So that's kind of what the story is about. But it is, you know, the theme of the song is, you know, negative thought patterns and negative environments. You know, the more that you learn about mindfulness, the more you'll be familiar with like the terms of like flow and like vibrations and things like that.
Do you mean like flow state?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So in the song, in the intro, I was like, flow, also known as zoning, because there's a song later in the album. It's like, you know, subtitled Zoning. And that's that moment where it's like, you take a step back, you have that epiphany. It's like, it's almost kind of like, it's almost kind of like the Avatar state, going back to that Avatar: The Last Airbender reference. But Vibes is like this point. I would say it's probably like the begin. If we're thinking of it like a film or a play or something like that, it's like the beginning of like the second act or something like that, where this is the beginning of the conflict, right? It's the conflict that is both physical and internal. in that there are a bunch of different situations that are happening, but I'm also highlighting the points of which I messed up and I should be taking responsibility for my actions in these negative situations and environments and thought patterns. So like the first verse, kind of talking about being in the wrong place and, with, I guess, kind of like the wrong people, I guess, if you can even phrase it like that. Maybe the wrong people at that wrong moment in time for them, because like, I don't think that people are inherently bad.
Yeah, sometimes you can
like
just
that.
have kind of a bad recipe.
Right, exactly. So that was kind of like what verse 1 was talking about. Verse 2 was talking about a situation where really early on in my career as a rapper, it was back in like 2008, 2009, and I had just put out like a number of songs that had been catching on pretty well in the local scene and like on campus. And the assumption was that all of the people that I considered to be friends would like support it. And there was one person who I wouldn't say it was like, a direct friend of mine, but it's like a friend of a friend. He was around. And so the assumption was that there would be that level of support from those people that I cared about. And he was very vocal of like being anti AJ at that point. It was like I thought, yeah, I was like I think that this music is corny. I don't think that it has any merit. I think that there are other people that are more deserving. I don't think that he's lyrical enough. He's too poppy. He's too this. He's too that. And I held that for a really long time, and I resented it, and I resented him, and to a fault, because there was an incident that happened years later in Chicago, and I think it was Logan Square, and he was actually like gunned down and murdered.
Jesus.
So
and you told that story in one of these like blog entry things, right?
Yeah.
It's an awful story.
Yeah. So I talk about it in the blog, and I talk about it. So that's the story that I talk about in the second verse. And I never let it go when he was here and still alive. I was never able to have that moment of like burying the hatchet or like just getting over it. And like at that point, like, I wasn't thinking about it. I had grown to a point where I was able to kind of accept the fact that I'm not for everybody. And I've come to peace with it. I mean, I certainly was terrible at taking, any kind of criticism back when I was, 18 and 19. And, I would defend my art and my viewpoints vehemently, again, to a fault. But now, like, almost 10 years later, 10 years later, I realized that not everybody really gives a fuck, and that's fine, so but
yeah, if you were doing something that everybody liked, number one, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But even if it were, it would probably be boring. It would just be plain vanilla.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's kind of what people go for when they're like, let's set out to make a song that cracks the top 40. Like when that's the goal, it's like, I don't know how often that goal is actually realized, because it seems to me like if you set out to make a song that just everybody's going to love and want to sing along with and dance to and stuff, you're probably going to make a song that nobody wants to do that with, because you're probably just going to be all formulaic and dull.
Yep.
Which maybe explains a lot of what's on the radio these days.
Yeah. I think leaning into the weird is the thing that makes it special. That's certainly why, songs like you remember the Gnarls Barkley record from way back from their first single, Crazy?
Yes.
It's like when that first came out, it was like
record.
Everybody was like, "What?"
Saint Elsewhere.
Yeah, that whole album was tight.
Yeah.
I want them to come out with their third album finally, but but when that first came out, everybody was like, "What the fuck is this?" Like nobody had ever heard it. And certainly, I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Danger Mouse was sampling like spaghetti western soundtracks and stuff like that. But
yeah, he's a phenomenally creative producer.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then CeeLo is a wonderful vocalist. I mean, he's got pipes. Obviously, it goes without saying that the guy can sing his head off.
Yep.
But as a lyricist too, he tackles some really, really interesting themes. There's a song that is ostensibly about necrophilia.
Yeah.
I think if you really
Necromancer
go
on the
into
first,
that
yeah.
song, that's not really what it's
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
But god damn, that song's clever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that specific song, Necromancer, that was actually the reason why my mom was not down with me listening to that album. And like she didn't even know that song on the album existed until like an older person that I was like friends with, like kind of like a older like church friend. Like he heard that I was like listening to this album and I played it for him, and then he listened to it on his own. And then like, of course, like coming from like a very like genuine and like good-hearted place, like he was like, I'm concerned that AJ's like listening to this music, da 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 da. Like not really seeing like the metaphor in it. And so when he told my mom that, my mom was like, yeah, I threw it away. I was like, what? You threw away this amazing album?
That's a bummer.
Yeah, but yeah, it's funny because everybody always has like that different interpretation of art, right? Like some people see it again for that surface value or that shock, but others, they see it for what it actually is, and it's speaking on something that it's not directly addressing. It's like you have to get into that other part of your consciousness to really tap into.
Yeah, and it's okay to use extremely dark metaphors to go to those places, because how else are you going to get to those places? I mean, for me, what that song about, what necromancy is about, is just the absolute darkest, most nightmarish version of what it would be like to be in a terrible relationship.
Yep.
I don't know if that's how he intended it.
Yeah.
I've done no research on that statement, but that's how it comes across to me. And it's kind of like, I mean, that, having been in some pathological relationships, that is kind of what it feels like. It feels like one or both of you is dead.
Yeah.
And not in the way that's like you die and then you're reborn and then you're stronger. It's like, no, you're just fucked.
Right.
And the line in it that sticks in my head is, I'll have my way with what's left of the will in her. Mm-hmm. That's a horrifying thing to say.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah.
I love that it's on that record. I love that he can go to that place.
Right. Because a lot of people are again, out of fear for saying the wrong thing, or the thing that not everybody is pleased with, it restricts a lot of artists from going to that kind of place. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we can get into, the shit that is polarizing or the shit that not everybody is going to agree with, the more that we can find ourselves in all of those moments. Mm-hmm. I would rather be somebody who's polarizing than somebody who's vanilla, as we said, earlier, because if everybody likes you, then nobody really likes you.
Yeah.
They don't have a reason for why they like you. At least with somebody like, Kanye West, it's like either you love or you hate him. There's no in between. There's no like, oh, Kanye's just all right. I engage with him passively. It's like, no, that motherfucker is an evil bastard and he's arrogant and narcissistic, or like, Kanye West is the greatest. He's better than Beethoven. Like, like,
he's either the second coming or he's a consumer whore.
Right.
And there's no middle ground for people.
Right. And I think that those are more often than not, those are the best artists. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And whether or not you like Kanye, you cannot deny the impact that he's made on our industry. Absolutely.
His achievement is monumental, and regardless of how you think he got there, whether or not that's relevant, it's like, it worked. Maybe there's something we can learn from that.
Yeah.
Even if you never make music that sounds anything like his, that's maybe a bit of a tangent, but that's another thing that I think people have really unproductive discussions about, like with style and genre and stuff. It's like, oh, I never listened to country music, or I never listened to heavy metal, or I was the worst about this when I was in high school. I was like, I'm never going to listen to rap. It's like, what a stupid thing to say. Like some of my favorite music now is all of those three things that so many people, especially classical musicians, which is my background, they'll write that kind of stuff off because they think it's vapid or vulgar, or they think that there's something wrong with it. And it's like, yeah, maybe there's some of it that is, I'm not going to sit here and say that every country music song is like this beautiful pastoral portrayal of blue collar American life. Right. I'm not going to sit here and say that every metal song is like a transcendent vision of man's capacity for power or something. Right. Some of it is, right. But not all of it is.
Right.
But you have to find the ones that are, and you have to learn from these things, whatever it is that they're trying to teach you.
Right. And I always find that like when people want to make an argument for why something is bad, they always like obviously you're going to use the worst examples of that genre versus the best example. It's just like I hate country because Dolly Parton is terrible. It's like who's going to say that? Is you're always going to be like I hate country because Big and Rich is stupid. And it's like obviously, but like you could say the same thing for any genre and the worst version of that genre and have that argument be valid. It's actually kind of furthering and down the tangent line. There was that Quincy Jones interview that came out recently where he was talking about contemporary musicians and this new generation of how people aren't as devoted to musicianship or learning an instrument or composing or arranging or anything like that in contemporary pop music, and pop obviously encompassing more than just pop radio. And while I think that there is certainly merit to what he's saying, I also think that it kind of depends on what you're trying to do too, because if I'm a DJ producer or if I'm a rapper, just straight up a rapper, and I don't have any aspirations to do anything past that, then I'm not gonna devote my time to learning an instrument. I'm gonna devote my time to, all right, how am I gonna do blends better? How am I gonna learn my DAW at a more rapid rate, or what VST can I use or integrate into my chain that will make my sound like my sound? If I'm a rapper, what metaphors or what similes or what literary devices in my arsenal am I overusing, or which ones am I underutilizing? Maybe I could integrate some alliteration or some palindromes, or like what I mean, like all these things that are very trade specific that I think don't get brought into the conversation of whether this person is good at their craft. They just use this barometer or this rubric for everybody, when it should be this rubric is for this person, this rubric is for this person, this rubric is for, and they're all measured in different ways. If you want to talk about musicianship as musician to musician, that's totally fine. But I don't think that we can, expect musicianship from somebody like, I don't know, like 21 Savage. Like, I'm sure he's not really interested in learning instruments.
Yeah,
like,
he's never going to be a concert pianist.
Right. Like,
whatever.
He's, at least to this point, he hasn't expressed any of those ambitions or interests. And so us saying he's not a good musician or he's not a good rapper because he doesn't aspire to that was like, well, that's kind of dumb. It's like at that point, it's like you should judge him on his his lyricism or his cadences, the rhythms that he's using, his performance. How is he live? Like all these things. Like, and I know like there's probably some people out there that's like, how is he live? He's just rapping. It's like, but that's also another thing too, that I think other people that are not fully participate in the hip hop community, like they don't understand.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're just rapping over a beat, you're not performing. It's like, all right, well, you try and do that then.
Exactly. To clarify, that is 100% performing.
Yeah. And
I think what's fair to say is this is true for general audiences, but it's even more true for professional working musicians. If there's a style, like let's say you're not into metal or something. If there's a style that you're not into on the basis of like the general parameters of that style, then I kind of think that what you need to do is actually go into that music, get your hands on as much of the good stuff and we all know guys who will feed us all of that stuff, like just find a metalhead. He will tell you what to listen to and you will get educated from it, because until you've done that, you have a bad model for what that kind of music is supposed to be doing. And there's layers to this too. Like you can maybe make some kind of overarching statements about like music as a whole, but it's really, really hard to do that because there's so many layers of abstraction underneath that it's like if you were going to say something like that, then the conversation would have probably just stopped with Beethoven. And it almost did in what, 1828 or something.
Right.
There were a whole lot of people that damn near just gave up forever.
Right.
But that's obviously not a productive way of thinking about things. It's like classical composers often think like, oh, I'm terrified to write a string quartet because the Bartók ones are so good. It's like, no, write a string quartet, dude.
Right.
Don't be scared.
Right.
So if you have a model for a style, then you can maybe also form some models for sub-styles. You know, like within metal, there's all these different like types of metal and stuff, and sometimes they get a little bit silly with like how fine the distinctions really are. It's like, no, this is not a style, this is two bands.
Right.
But then that's also cool because then you can have models of how that band operates. And then if that band's cool and they're exploring their own potential, then they're going to challenge your model of that thing. Like that's why so many people love Radiohead, I think, because as soon as you think you have them figured out, they go in some other direction. I happen to really admire that about them. I also don't necessarily think that they're always 100% successful in going whatever direction they're trying to do, but they are 100% successful in trying to do that.
Right.
And that's a lot more than what I see around me sometimes.
Right. Some people will say that they tried, but you can hear the half-heartedness, or you can see the insincerity in trying.
Yeah.
The ulterior motives and all that stuff. It's like, oh, I tried this new thing because I saw that other people were also doing this. So now I feel more comfortable in doing it, when really I had the idea a couple of years ago and I was too scared to do it then, but then other people are doing it now. So now I feel like I should.
Yeah. And that's a really nice segue too. So
Yeah,
the next song on the record is Long Hair Freestyle. I fucking love this song, by the way. It's so catchy.
Thanks. Shout out to Hutch.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about him. He's the guy who produced not all of them, right? Most of the beats on this record, or is it all of them?
He did no. So he did Long Hair Freestyle. He did Expensive, and I think that's it.
Oh, is it really only
he only did the two.
Oh wow!
I think the majority of the production actually came from Big Kid. Now that I think about it, so Big Kid did Have You Ever. Oh, Hutch did Safe Child too. I'm forgetting that one. He did 3 records. But Big Kid did Have You Ever, Passport. He did Ride With Me. He did Half of Something. He did he did a lot. But yeah, it's scattered. I would say that out of the 11 songs, it's pretty scattered across, because Tone 808s, who's a homie of mine from Toledo, shout out to Tone. He did a number of those records, and actually the original concept behind Excuses was something that he and I came up with. And so when I say that this album was made over the course of 4 years, is like, you got to keep in mind, like, I made probably like 4 different albums in those 4 years. It's not like over 4 years we only did these 11 songs. It's like we probably did like 60, 70 songs. Yeah. And they all had different variations and forms, and one version of it was like gonna be a parallel narrative to like The Alchemist, which is a book like about like a typical like hero's journey of seeking like personal legends and stuff. And it's obviously it's an amazing book. Everybody knows, or everybody should know The Alchemist. If you haven't, then you should look it up.
Yeah. And The Hero's Journey too. The Hero with 1,000 Faces is the Joseph Campbell book that I think might have been the first to advance that theory. It may be older than that. The thing that he's describing is far older than that book. The thing that he's describing is as old as people, as far as anybody can tell. Yeah. But that's the earliest example that I'm aware of somebody codifying it into an abstraction. And I was actually going to ask a question about the hero's journey on this thing, because I think it's pretty evident that the thing has a hero's journey structure. Like we mentioned, was it the song Vibes? That's kind of like maybe the place where it's the refusal of the call or the temptation by negative influence. Yeah. Some part in the middle of the hero's journey, bad shit always happens. Yeah. Is it maybe fair to say that this record kind of tells the story of its own creation?
I would say, like, maybe not its own creation, but like some form of it. Absolutely. I think so. and I think in the way that, there are markers in time where we'll revisit our favorite albums and say this song was going on during this moment in my life. I think that this album is kind of a good example of that as well, where it's like this was happening at this moment in my life, or when I made this mental breakthrough, this song happened.
Yeah.
And so I think conceptually, yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
really
I would say
cool.
so.
So long hair freestyle. The excuse is I need to change who I am to fit in, which is like, who has not had that thought?
Right.
It's every day. If you're me, if you're
yeah.
one of these introverted wannabe intellectual types, it's like
not one of them. You're intellectual.
Oh, come on. But it's like you constantly feel like you're having to make these almost like censorings of whatever it is that you have in your head to make it relatable to other people. And at some point, I think what I realize, and what I think most people realize eventually, is that when you're doing that, you're actually like making yourself seem even more like an alien, because people can tell that you're not genuine.
Yeah.
And you don't need to change who you are. You just need to actually be that person.
Yeah, I think people are, and as fucked up and backwards as it is, because of the way that, there are institutions and systems in place to kind of put us through this rigorous and intense social conditioning over the course of our lives. Despite the fact that that's, constant, I don't think that it's ever going to stop, for as long as we'll be alive. Even though that's set in place, and obviously for economic reasons to like, keep us conditioned for like being a solid workforce, whatever. People like you the most when you lean into yourself. I think a perfect recent example of that is Cardi B. Cardi B is somebody who originally started out being popular as like a reality television star, and she was known for like a very like outgoing, like outspoken personality, and she transitioned that into her social media, and then finally became a full-fledged artist, a full-fledged rapper. And people love her for the fact that she just says what's on her mind, and she's not somebody who sits there in the interview like how we were talking before and is very picture perfect. Like she'll just say whatever the hell she's thinking, or she'll like randomly make like sound effects in like in the middle of her sentence, and like it's funny and it's endearing, but you can tell that it's coming from a genuine place. Like you can tell that like she acts like that in a regular like day-to-day life. And I think the more and more you get to know those people who are just very comfortable in their own skin, the more you realize it's like, oh, maybe it's not so scary to just be yourself. In hip hop specifically, I think a huge turning point for people starting to just embrace who they were, like what I like to call like the weirdo renaissance. I think Kanye and Pharrell and Lupe were all people who kind of I don't want to say broke through at the same time, because they certainly had their different like high moments. But I think they all represent different ideas behind expressing what it is that makes you special. And once we saw those as being the norm as opposed to the exception to the rule, once we realized that, oh, this is the norm now, we can all just be ourselves, I think that that's when you started seeing more and more really like provoking hip hop, even to the point now where I feel like I don't want to say it's better off than where it was, because I think that that's almost kind of like an insult to like the past or whatever. But
because the past of hip hop is extraordinary.
Oh, absolutely.
It's even the very, very earliest examples of it is some of my favorite music ever.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And I came up off of hip hop in '96. This was like literally right after Biggie had passed away, or like 96, 97. And so
Must be
like
an odd moment to come into it after like this enormous space is all of a sudden
right.
vacated.
Yeah, but as a kid, I didn't really understand the gravity of the situation until years
Sure,
later,
yeah.
right? Like I was like, oh, like this song's tight. It was like, who's this guy again? I was like, I don't care. I'm gonna go play outside.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And so there was that, and then Big Willie Style was a huge one, which is Will Smith's record that like went, I think it's like Diamond or something like that. Like it's a monster of a record. And you know, I came up during that time, so it was either you were like the gangster image or you were the squeaky clean like Will Smith dude.
Yeah,
like there
sure.
was no really like in between. And I think that what, again, what Kanye and Pharrell and Lupe represent is stepping into like, it's okay for you to, you know, say that you're a family man and write a song about it, or write a song about your mom, or write a song about Jesus, or let's write songs about skateboarding, or let's write songs about outer space, and you know what I mean, draw those metaphors and stuff. And so
let's write a song about long hair.
Right, yeah, right, long hair, yeah, long hair freestyle.
There's wisdom to be gained in all of these gray areas that are maybe not normally associated with what an outsider might think of as being associated with hip hop. It's like that's not really what hip hop is. Definitely not anymore.
Right.
If it ever was that.
Right. It's funny that you said like gray spaces, because that is like a through line actually through the making of this is like coming to the realization that life doesn't really exist in like the black or white spaces. It's always in the gray spaces.
Yeah.
That life exists. And I think this is another example of that. Like long hair freestyle is kind of an extension of that feeling that like I don't know if this is ever gonna get to the point where like somebody is like super researching me and like looking at pictures of me or whatever, but just because this is audio, I have long hair. It's very obvious I have long hair. He does.
He's not making this up.
Yeah, and it's long curly hair, and my ethnic background is Black and Asian, so I'm mixed. I'm a biracial young man, and I didn't start growing out my hair really until maybe like 2013, 2014, and it had kind of been on and off, but like now it's the longest that it's ever been, and so I, alongside with doing the music. I have a day job that I'm responsible for, and I do, marketing communications, and sometimes I'll be in, a boardroom meeting with, these executives, and they'll be in the room with like their suits and stuff, or like they're just like they'll work casual,
I bet you
dress
rock
code.
A suit, though.
Oh no, I certainly can. Yeah, no, I'm not bad looking, man. I clean up pretty nice. But yeah, I mean, I just go into places again, like feeling comfortable with who I am. Like, so I'll just wear my boots and, t-shirt and jeans and a hoodie, and I'll just like go in, or, you know what I mean? Like, and so the hair thing comes in because it's a consistent topic for me now. Especially for people that aren't all the way familiar with me or comfortable with me yet. They'll think that that's like a jumping off point, or like I was like, oh, let's talk about that. That's very obvious.
Yeah.
And for people that aren't really familiar with, what it's like to be Black with, with hair, you know what I'm saying? Like not like straight up bald or whatever. Like, Black women have it, a lot. Their stories, with how they treat their hair and stuff like that is like more than I could ever imagine. Not only being, a woman, but also being a Black woman with hair. But
yeah, you hear all these crazy stories in like the military about these bizarre restrictions that are placed on specifically the hair of Black women. It's like, that seems a little on the nose, don't you think?
Right. This
isn't the time where you want to be making statements like that publicly.
right. And it's very obvious that America specifically is held to like the European beauty standard and shit like that, or like the Eurocentric. So it's not surprising that there are things like, I'm like blanking on her name. Yeah. Anyways, there was like an instance where there was like actress who like had her like hair like photoshopped out, but it was like this is like a black woman's hair that you're like photoshopping though. And I think the lack of awareness around it is kind of jarring at times. It's like, man, we still don't know that that's a thing. You guys still don't know that that's a thing. So when people come up to me and they ask me about my hair, or like they'll like touch my hair, I was like, man, like why would you feel comfortable touching my hair as being somebody that you don't know? Like you wouldn't do that to literally anybody else. You wouldn't go up to like a white woman and touch their hair. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, it was like, because that again, like that's sexual assault. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, she will bring the cops.
Right. That's something that you can be legitimately arrested for. But, for black women or for black men, it's like, people just feel like, oh, it's like, I'm going to put my hands through your hair. It's like, why though? Like, so there have been plenty of times where I've thought it would just be a lot easier to cut my hair so that I don't have to deal with any of this shit. But then realizing that I'm not responsible for the way that other people's rudeness affects, you know what I mean? Like I can't be responsible for their rudeness. Mm-hmm. I can only be responsible of how I react to their rudeness. And, the song is kind of like a fuck you to everybody that kind of takes that, right? And it's funny because the reason why it's called Long Hair Freestyle versus like Long Hair Song is like the song is like, yes, it's about like the long hair and like the rebellion behind it, but it's more about the feeling of the rebellion behind it, because the verses, like I don't even think I talk about long hair in the verses at all. I think I talk about it in the chorus. I think
you're right.
Yeah, I talk about it in the chorus and in the bridge, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so the verses were just kind of like moments in time where I was like, you know what, I feel the same way as like me getting, a fuck you attitude about like you guys treating me rude for my hair. Here are other moments where I'm like gonna tell you fuck you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Yeah, it's like it's about identity.
Yeah.
And assumptions that people make about identity based on appearance, which is just like the stupidest possible way that you could go through life. Imagine if we did that to, I'm trying to think of a good example, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to do it off the top of my head, but to do just like a totally like non-controversial example, imagine if we did that with plants. Mm-hmm. How many plants are beautiful that if you eat them, they will kill you? Mm-hmm. And versus how many plants are kind of strange looking, but they're delicious and nutritious, like a potato. Right, potatoes are awesome, but like you'd never think to put one of those things in your mouth if you just saw one on the ground. It looks like a turd.
Right. It looks strange.
And so the point that I'm making is basically just like there's a whole bunch of layers to any person, mm-hmm. and the one that is presented to you visually in the time that it takes to present something to you visually, which is instant, is we don't make assumptions, or at least we shouldn't be making assumptions about anything based on a mode of cognition that happens right away. That's just a bad model to navigate the world, regardless of whether or not it's about cultural sensitivity and so forth and so on. It's just from an evolutionary perspective, it's dangerous. It will make you stop living. Mm. So like, why do we have this thing where we apply that sort of thinking to people, which are like the most complex things in the universe? And I mean that technically. The human brain is the most complicated structure that exists in the known universe. And it is way, way, way too easy for people to fall into the trap of just totally ignoring all of the complexities of a person because they have a certain complexion or a certain fashion or whatever. And it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
When you think about it for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Don't judge a book by its cover.
So the next song is called Something with an apostrophe.
Yes.
And the excuse is, I'm not ready to commit.
Yeah. The apostrophe is dumb. I mean, it's not
dumb.
It's not dumb. I'm being facetious. I just like the way that it looks better than having the G on it. like having the G on it just like looks ugly to me. I don't know why.
There is something about it, like, I don't know what it is. I wasn't planning on talking about that, but it's like there is something about it that's like when you have one of those
Something
in there,
about it.
yeah, because nobody says something.
Right.
It's an awkward thing, and it makes it seem more formal than it ought to be.
Right.
In the context of
I
a rap
have
record.
something I'd like to say. Yeah. But this one was a fun one to make. It was a really like unconventional story. If you go through the experience, I talk about how it came together or whatever. But this one was produced by Big Kid and Red Buttons. Shout out to both of the homies. But the excuse that it relates to, yes, I'm not ready to commit. And again, this was one of those ones where I didn't really realize the excuse until after the fact. Like we were just writing the song and then it just came together, it revealed itself. So in this, similarly to Passport, it's kind of like an upbeat song that kind of has like, I wouldn't say like sad undertones, but it's more like, what's lighter than sad? I don't know.
Maybe representative of mild psychological malaise.
Yeah,
there we go.
Malaise, there we
in
go.
stark contrast to something.
Right. Yeah. Yes. But yeah, it's the story of this character who wants something more from their partner, and it seems like, you know, whenever they go away, it's like validation of, you know, maybe their lack of reciprocation in the relationship and talking about that. But obviously it's a lot more fun than how I'm describing it right now. But yeah.
Well, it's to me it was a song about fear-based reasoning. That's what I wrote in my little notes over here, that it's kind of like it seems to me to be telling a story about a person who makes decisions based on what they're afraid of rather than what they want.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
I would say that in this situation, the person that's making the decision based off of fear, is that the person that is going away in the relationship? Like,
I guess
that's not
it could
committing?
be either one.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Because that's what I would say. I would say that if it is based off of fear-based reasoning, then I would say that it's more than likely the person who is unwilling to commit, because it's it's somebody who is afraid of what that could actually feel like, right? Similar to how I've talked to people who have dealt with abandonment issues and so they're clingy. I've dealt with other people who are so entrenched in, you know, essentially themselves, that they've developed this habit of like, whenever they see commitment, they run. And it's for a lot of different reasons. It's like, oh, I want to, you know, focus on me or my work, or, you know, I'm not in the place yet to da 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 da. It's like, I don't think that there's really ever a time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that there's an optimal time for anybody to be like, I'm ready to say that this person is important to me, so that I'm gonna commit to this person. Like, I don't think that anybody has that stage in human development, right? Like, it kind of goes back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You would assume that once you reach that top level of self-actualization, that would be the best moment to get into a relationship with somebody who is also self-actualized. The problem is that hardly ever happens.
Yeah.
You know? So.
And people who attain the top level don't get to stay there.
Right.
By any stretch of the imagination.
It's a sliding
it's
scale.
This cyclical, weird thing.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be a pyramid. It should be like almost like a circle or something. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. That to me is the reason why I say that it's an excuse. It's because there is no optimal time. There is no best time to get. I mean, there might be a best time for you, you know, you as a person, but a lot of times if we just left it up to, you know, what we think consciously, will lead ourselves down the wrong path because of our subconscious programming, and sometimes our emotions seep into it to the point where we create that faulty reasoning to where it makes sense logically, but everything behind it was, the shit that was actually driving it.
Yeah. When you align all those parts, you can get to feeling. You can get to somebody that it makes perfect sense for them to be feeling the emotion of hesitancy or whatever. It's just that those aren't the parts that they should have been using. It's my favorite podcast right now is Jocko Podcast with Jocko Willink. And he has this, I think it was like a tweet or something that he did that just says, the longer you sit around and wait, the longer you sit around and wait.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, done. Yeah.
Here's a real gift for brevity. I'm jealous of it. So the next song is called Ride With Me. This is another one of my favorite songs on the record. I really love the way... I really love the hook, and I also love the way that it's mixed and the way it sits in the song. It's just like, so this is another one where the theme is break time.
Yeah.
Right? And I just wrote like good chillin', and also though easy and rewarding collaboration, because I think in the blog post that accompanied this one, you said was this the first one you did with the producer that worked on it?
With Big Kid. Yeah, this is like one of the very first ones that we did together. And it really was like it came together so quickly. Like I was in the I don't want to call it in the studio. I mean the studio at the time was just like my room.
Solid.
Yeah, right. Now it's like my other room. I have a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, like close to like Fairfax or whatever, and I have a roommate, and so she's like basically like gone a lot. So I have the house to myself. And so the third room now is the studio.
Solid.
So now, so instead of calling
the dream.
That's the dream, right? And so now instead of calling it the studio, I said, I'm going to record in the third room. Like, I'm probably going to call it like third room studio or something. I don't know.
That's cool.
Right.
I like that.
But,
get a sign made up.
Yeah, got to. But at the time, I had all of my studio equipment in my actual room, which made for like a tight, like working space. And at that point, I don't know what had happened that kind of got me down, but I wasn't really as engaged as I was earlier on in the day when we were working. And the thing about Big Kid is that he's perpetually like excited and like amped up. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that like he's like 10 years younger than me, but outside of that, like he's just like really like amped and motivated to like work on music. And so we had already knocked out 2 or 3 ideas, and we did some voice memos, like wrote a little bit, made some beats. And then, once I was like at that moment where I was kind of down, I was like, all right, well, things are winding down. The session's probably not going to be too much longer. And so he like throws me off, and he's like, all right, what's next? So it's like, let's do another one. Let's do another. And I'm like, man, I don't know, man. Like, I don't have any ideas, man. And he's like, man, come on, man. Like, there's got to be like a certain like, feeling that you have. I was like, what's the feeling? And like, I don't want to be straight up with him and just be like, I'm really not into this right now. You know what I mean? Because like, I didn't like, I'm still like getting to know this person, and like, although I would tell that to somebody that I know or I have known for quite a long time, is like, I don't want to seem like I'm being like rude or standoffish or whatever.
Sure, yeah. And,
mind you, I'm also still trying to be like a good host because this is at my house. And so I'm like, all right, so that I can like re-engage myself and actually participate, I'm just going to throw him the first song idea or first song vibe that I can think of. And the song was Wheels of Steel by Outkast.
Nice.
And so I was like, this is what I'm feeling right now. Because it was like kind of like a happy medium of kind of being like low key and mellow, but like still kind of like, bouncy. And I don't think that I had done a song that felt like it was in that realm. And so I play it for him, and he was like, oh, we can do this. And so he finds this loop, finds these drums, we put everything together, and I come up with the hook like within 2 to 3 minutes. Like I just start humming it and like write it down, and then for the verses, like we were just like going back and forth, like freestyling like a bunch of nonsense, just a bunch of like no word verses, like just mumbling stuff. And actually, I have a voice memo of one of the ones that he did, or like one of the flows and cadences that he did, which I actually use like pretty closely to his original take as the second verse.
Cool.
It was like, again, like us like freestyling, like not having any words. So it's like we're just like doing like the
Just to get a rhythm.
You know, it's just a rhythm.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just filled in. I literally just filled in the words from what he had said in that voice note that I had, and it came out really, really good. I was very surprised at like how easily all that came together.
I love that kind of serendipity.
Yeah.
Where you're just like working on something and then a total accident happens and you're like, that's the song.
Yeah.
Right there. That's it.
Yeah. And the song just feels good to me. And it does, like, even to go a little bit further into like the Outkast thing, is like, it does feel like it's almost kind of like, I don't want to say both sides of Outkast, but it's almost kind of like the first verse is Big Boy and the second verse is Andre 3000, like a little bit. If not Andre 3000, then maybe like Eminem or something like that. It's like Big Boy and Eminem on a record. But yeah,
I'm gonna have to go listen to that one again. I don't have it in my head enough to. Yeah. I'm gonna think about that next time I listen to that record.
Yeah. It's definitely one of my favorites on the album for sure.
Cool, man. So then the next one is Expensive, and this is the one for people that don't know. This is the one that I'm peripherally involved in.
Actually, let's switch this up because we can
tell the story. It's a cool story.
Yeah, I want to get your perspective on this because I can kind of give a brief scenario here of how it came together with me and Hutch, because this was a beat that I got back at the end of 2015, and I hadn't worked on the song like seriously for probably almost like a year from the point that I got the beat until like the song actually came together. And so I had an initial draft, I recorded it, and then I got introduced to Matt and everybody through our mutual friend Koyo. And then from there, Matt, do you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. So basically what we did was AJ come over to the studio, and then we just kind of like loaded I think it was like 3 or 4 different tracks.
Yeah.
And we had the string quartet here, and then I was playing keyboards or like maybe like a synth bass or just whatever random sounds that I pulled up that seemed like they made sense. And we went through a couple of these songs and just kind of jammed over them. Like no sheet music, no nothing, just play whatever pops into our head. And it was another one of these instances, for me at least, where it's like, this is way, way easier than collaboration sometimes is, and there's something here that needs to be explored. Mm-hmm. And the one that we picked one song that happens to be this song, although I don't know if we necessarily knew that it was going to be this at the time.
Right.
To kind of like really flesh out. Like we sat and talked about it for a little bit, still didn't write anything down. But said, okay, so over this part, the strings are going to do these stabby things, and then over this other part, the strings are going to do these long, swelly things. And then I think I was just like sitting there with a Rhodes patch, just kind of comping, just playing some cool chords or whatever. And we recorded that, and then said, okay, so let's flesh this out into a proper arrangement. So I took ideas from what we did, and then I just, this is the way that what's so fascinating to me about the way that you work is that you can just come up with these things really, really quickly. And I'm not good at that. I have to sit there and be a composer and puzzle out every little detail, which is, doesn't equate to speed necessarily. Right. But I think when I can do that, when I have the time to do that sort of thing, it's usually really rewarding for me because it gets to be like exactly the way that I want it. Like, right. How can I make the best possible version of whatever it is that I do when I normally write for strings that serves this song just right and doesn't cover the vocal and leaves space for the other elements in the beat and stuff. And the rest is history, I guess. We got the thing recorded and it sounds great.
Yeah.
It sounds expensive.
Yeah, it does sound expensive. Yeah, we did this at a hobby shop in was it Highland Park, right?
Highland Park or Eagle Rock.
It's It's like it was pretty close to like the border or whatever, and
which is a wonderful little studio.
Yeah, it's great. It's absolutely great. I was pretty shocked at like how like small it looked on the outside, and then when you go in, it's like this like pretty like expansive like band room and control room, and then
I guess
like
I shouldn't say little studio. You're right.
Yeah.
It's, the live room is good sized. I guess it's like sometimes when you think of big studios, you think of spaces that have like several control rooms and several live rooms, and this isn't that. It's one fairly good sized live room and one just epic control room. It's got like this old API console in there. It's got an old Trident in there, which you never see, or at least I never see them. It's walking in there is a history lesson. Yeah. There's all this cool equipment. And the guy who runs the place has worked with some pretty extraordinary musicians, and it's a really special environment in which to make this song. I think it was really rewarding.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. I'm still like, kind of spinning from that session a little bit, because I think about it and I'm like, man, this like really came together like a lot, like just like what you said, it's like a lot easier than what I was expecting, I guess. Or maybe at the time I didn't really even have any expectations because of how clean the jam sessions were, and I was like, okay, I'm just comfortable in this situation and with these people, like with all of you guys, and I think that translates pretty well on the song. Like you can kind of hear how clean everything came together. Going back to what you were saying about composing too, and going back to what I was saying earlier about the Quincy Jones interview, is that reading his thoughts on how the new generation of musicians aren't prioritizing or making efforts to learn composition and arrangement is like kind of the reason why this next phase of what I want to do will will heavily involve that. I got a bunch of new gear I'll probably tell you about off air, but I got a bunch of new gear, and I'm teaching myself how to play the guitar, and I'm finally like going all the way in on piano because I know how to get around and work around it, but I want to be a lot more proficient at it than I currently am. But I think that'll be kind of like the foundation that I lay, and then from there I want to be able to, like, if I have an idea, then I can like just write out the sheet music on some paper and just be like, all right, well, I can just give this to you. Like, this is what the song is.
Dude.
Like,
I'm excited about that. For the record, this is the first time that we've talked about this. Yeah. And I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that I want to say about what I said earlier about like being a composer and getting really inside of the notation and the technique of composition is something that we'll definitely do more episodes of this thing, and that'll get discussed to death. And what I want to make clear, like right out of the gate, is that I absolutely, and this is going to piss off all of my classical buddies, but I absolutely do not think that you need to know how to do that. Like, if your process does not involve notation, awesome. Some of my favorite music ever is made that way. Like, I think, bringing up Radiohead again, I don't think Tom York reads music still. And there was a time when nobody in that band read music. Obviously Johnny does now because he's making all these like orchestral film scores and stuff. Yeah. I don't know if the other guys do. I don't know that much about what actually goes on with them. But music is about feeling, it's about stories, it's about metaphysical spirituality, weird abstract truths that you can't discern any other way than with art. It is not about quarter notes and eighth notes and polyrhythms and whatever. Those things are tools. Yeah, absolutely. And I actually have a lot of respect and admiration for people that start without those tools. It's like, if you want to be a carpenter, well, I mean, carpentry tools are expensive. And I know this because I am an amateur carpenter. And it's kind of like, if you have a saw and a hammer and that's it, you can still make stuff. Yep. So make your like super simple coffee table or whatever you can make with your saw and your hammer, and then sell that piece. And now maybe you have the money to buy a proper table saw, or maybe not off of that first project, but you have the money to buy some new stuff. And then as you get better at carpentry or whatever your thing is, then your list of tools also gets bigger and more comprehensive and will allow you to realize your vision more specifically and more accurately. That's the same journey that a classically trained composer goes on. It's just that, like, we have sort of a different problem in that usually by the time you go and get an education in composition, you've already sort of gotten your head around how notation works, because chances are you play an instrument. Like, you know, for me, I was taking piano lessons for a bunch of years before I went to school to be a composer. But we still have this horrifying learning curve in front of us. Like, okay, you know how quarter notes and eighth notes work. Now let's figure out how structure works. Now let's figure out how pacing works. That's a nightmare. That continues to be a nightmare, and I've been doing this for 20 years now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't really matter where you start or what your specific toolkit looks like. Just start.
Yeah. You just gotta
get
do
after it.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point earlier where music is not about the eighth notes and quarter notes. It's about revealing truth, and the notation is just a tool. And I think that as artists and as musicians, in my opinion, I feel like learning composition and learning notation should be able to help most musicians. In theory, it should. But if learning it is more stressful than it actually deserves to be, and it interferes and blocks your truth or blocks your process from revealing your truth, then you shouldn't do it. Yeah. You know, you should just stick to that pure form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would argue that if it's that much of a struggle, then there's probably some way that you're going about it that's not optimal for you, and maybe you need to find a teacher or a different teacher. I think there's some of that stuff. Trying to learn it yourself is just like you're gonna have to beat your head against it so hard so many times that it might be better to just like sign up for a music theory class at a community college or something.
Yep.
Or like, there's really, really valuable resources on the internet now for this kind of stuff. Like, there's a couple of YouTube channels that I think are doing really good work in that regard, like Adam Neely and Jacob Collier are both very, very well educated music theory guys, it seems to me. And it's kind of like, it's a really, really valuable tool. It's not the only tool. And it's valuable to the point where it's kind of like, if you go your whole career having never learned it, that's a little weird to me. But I mean, if you're making good music and I can't tell that there's aspects of the technique of composition that you don't have your head around, if I can't tell that, who cares?
Yeah.
If it sounds good, it sounds good.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
That's all right, cool. So the next song is Fear and Desire, and the subtitle is Zoning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is about epiphany.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And you mentioned Last Airbender in the blog entry for this one.
Yeah. Last Airbender, man. It's like
the show.
It's the show, man. It's the show. That moment, man. I don't think that there's ever gonna be a one moment for anybody, right? Like, this is the moment where everything made sense. It's like, no, I think people have those like every day. I think people have those, you know, whatever interval of time that you want to measure it as, right? Like, it's pretty consistent across the board, because all that is just a representation of progress. And for this, I think it was just trying to encapsulate a moment where I was being very real with myself, with where I was at and where I want to go. And at that time, I was pretty introspective on where I had been previously, and the aspirations that I have for music, or where I want my life trajectory to go. I think that all, you know, came together on the verses of the song. We recorded the new version of this at Stankonia Studios, which is actually Outcast Studio in
awesome.
Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So
the kind of ghosts in that place.
Yeah. No, it was great. Actually, funny enough, we did this and Vibes at Stankonia. So Vibes was like a song that hadn't been created at that point, and I recorded there. And then Zonin was a song that was already out that I was re-recording specifically for the album version. So there was like I don't know if it's replaced yet on SoundCloud or not, but there's a version of Zonin on SoundCloud that I don't want to say is inferior or anything like that, but it's a completely different vocal take. It's a completely different mix, and you can tell.
Is that also like kind of less produced?
Yeah, like I recorded it like in a closet. You know what I mean?
Awesome.
Like yeah, like that.
Sometimes I really like that though. If you have like the demo version and then the studio version,
Right?
And there's sometimes a rawness to the demo one that is it's not. It means that it's not less valuable than the studio one. They're both good just for different reasons.
Yeah. There were moments in the original one that I was trying to emulate and recreate in the updated one, and I was like, well, they're two different moments in time, so I was like, I can't really do that. And so the only thing that I can do is just make sure that the performance on this new version is great, is just as great. Not sonically the same, but I'm bringing the same passion for the delivery on it. And then we did some compositional things to add on to it, like all the humming that you hear in the background was stuff that was suggested and recorded by the engineer that was working the studio for Converse Rubber Tracks, which is the program that sent me out there to record at Stankonia. The engineer's name is Baines. Shout out to Baines if he's listening. But yeah, he came up with the idea to like add the like humming layers underneath to like bring it out a little bit more in the verses. So yeah. But
Listen
yeah,
to engineers.
Yeah, shout out
they
to
have
engineers.
good ideas.
Yeah. I'm real. Like that's another thing too that like I really came to understand in this making this specific project is that and I had already known that engineers are like the secret weapon that like nobody really like talks about all that much. And I had known that since like 2009, but like more and more so over the course of these 4 years, like I had learned that. Like I learned that through Baines. I'd learned that through working with Jeff Jackson, who mixed this whole project. Michelle Mancini, who mastered some of the songs on here that were actually from the original version of Excuses. And then just appreciating the the producers a lot more, seeing a lot of, and this is kind of, I don't want to say only happening in hip hop because I'm sure it's happening across the entire music industry, but lately a lot of hip hop producers are coming forward with the way that they haven't been properly compensated by the record labels that put these songs out. And it alters the relationship that they have with these artists to the point where it's like, I might not work with this person who I consider a friend and we make great music together because they're signed to this label, which I think is really unfortunate. So,
you mean they're signed to a label that doesn't compensate people the way they feel that they, okay.
Right. Like one of the examples is that there's this producer by the name of TM88 who produced this song by Lil Uzi Vert called XO Tour Life. It was like one of the biggest songs of last year, one of the biggest radio songs of last year. And he hasn't seen any money from that. It's like this is a song that we're talking like has like over 1 billion streams on Spotify type big, like a huge.
Well, and then you
song.
said it was also a big radio hit, so it's like this is even divorced from the conversation about like streaming royalties and like because that's kind of a foregone conclusion at this point that the way that works is not the way that it should be working.
Right.
But you'd think if it's on the radio, that's weird.
yeah, it's messed up. It's messed up. Because sometimes record labels will pull that trick of like, oh, well, this isn't really an album, so we don't have the budget for it. This is just a mixtape. But like, what does that mean in 2018 where mixtapes are really still retail projects that are available for streaming and still being sold and purchased by consumers and still being played? The songs are still being played by, radio stations across the country. And sometimes those mixtape songs will be nominated for Grammys in some cases, like, Chance the Rapper or very early on, like Drake, like back in like 2010 or whatever. What does that mean, right? Just pay your producers, man. Just pay the people.
It doesn't seem like the sort of thing that needs to be explained, but yeah, I mean, maybe it does though, because we're in the business of making art, and so one of my favorite musicians at the moment is a guitarist by the name of Guthrie Govan. If there's guitar players listening, they all just lost their minds. He's a phenomenal musician, like the kind of which that there's like one of them born every 50 years. And there's this wonderful thing that he said on an interview, I think on the Andertons channel on YouTube, where he said, "Music's a friend, why turn it into a slave?" And he's describing an ideology that he kind of had when he was, I want to say that he's describing the way he thought when he was like younger and less experienced, and he like wasn't really sure how he felt about monetizing his craft, because it is a weird thing to think about. Like, we're making art, and art's not a commercial product. It's not the same thing as a set of headphones, even the equipment that's used to make music, like the microphone that we're talking into right now, and the speakers, everybody's stuff that it's going to be played through, like those are products. And it maybe seems almost offensive to some people's sensitivities to try and monetize and productize like it's content.
Right.
That seems like a weird thing to say about like art that you've cried and sweated and bled over.
Right.
But you know what? It's something that we work really, really hard to create, and it's something that we spend our entire lives thinking about and getting good at and practicing, and it should make money. I don't know what kind of money. I don't have the answers to all of those things. I think that it does get a little silly sometimes.
Yeah. I think that you should be able to make a living off of it, right?
Yes,
like
absolutely.
not in like a socialist kind of way where it's like everybody that's an artist like deserves to be paid a full salary or something. Like not like that.
That's a really bad idea.
Right. That's a bad idea
for reasons that might be discussed later.
Right. But like, I think at the very least though, people that have an audience should be able to make a living off of it, and they should be properly compensated and respected as somebody who's providing that level of experience or that that high-mindedness, because it is something that just like you said, we are putting our blood, sweat, and tears into, and if we're doing that and it's just a release and it's just out there into the world, and you want to share it with everybody with no expectations, that's totally fine. But if at the end of the day you say, hey, this is something that I invested a lot of time and a lot of energy into, I just ask that you give X amount of dollars back for owning this piece of me, essentially.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's unreasonable. Yeah.
And it's also like there's a way that it's transactional, in that like when you're making it, it's all about you and your imagination and your relationship to your art and your collaborators, and it's this very like sequestered, sacred space. It's making music is very, very much like a religious experience for a lot of people. But then when you're done making it, Tom York again, Radiohead. Today's Radiohead Day. Every day's Radiohead Day.
Yeah.
But he makes this point beautifully in an interview that he did around the time they released Kid A, where, oh dear, I've lost my train of thought. Might have to edit that out.
Or just keep it in. Just keep it in. We'll do it live.
He's talking about how when you finish making your music and it's out there in the public, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It's everybody else's that has the potential to have their lives impacted positively by your art. That's a real thing, and that's a sacred thing, but it's also like, it's not mine anymore, it's yours. And in every other institution in our culture where that's the thing that you say about it, that's called a transaction, and that involves money.
Right.
And it just seems like it makes sense when you say it that way.
Right. Absolutely.
We got one more song.
Yeah.
The Word.
The Word. The bird is the word.
Oh, no. So the excuse is I need to go somewhere else to make it happen.
Yeah. this song is about Toledo, straight up. This song is about my hometown and the things
Real
that I
quick,
saw.
we have a connection
Yeah.
to this. We didn't know this until after we started working together, but I went to school in Cleveland and you grow up or in Toledo, which is close to Cleveland.
Yeah. It's about
So
2.5 hours away, something like that.
We understand about Ohio.
Oh yeah, we certainly understand, and the socioeconomic factors that play a part in the Midwest life. Yeah. And it's crazy because at first this song, it like it still is like hands down it's about Toledo. But at first for me it was more of just like a biographical song. Just saying what it is, just flat out plain. But then I realized the reason why, again, going back to the idea of like figuring out what it was or having it reveal itself to you after the fact, I realized that the song, although I created it with the intention of it being biographical and being a little bit more revealing of where I came from and what my lifestyle is and, my upbringing, it also kind of revealed a lot of truths about the mentality of somebody who feels like they need to go to a coastal city like New York or LA, or just a bigger city in general, like Chicago.
Yeah, or like a music hub like Nashville or Austin or whatever.
Atlanta or any of these places that you feel like your profession is likely going to precede you, and therefore it probably would suit you to be in a place that is thriving and it's more economically beneficial to you to do so because there's actually jobs and opportunities there. But then I sat on this song for a while, probably since like 2015, and from the time that I made the song where I did feel like I had to be out here in LA and essentially like prove to maybe not the music industry, but prove to I guess in an abstract kind of way the world that I had something valid to say and I deserved to have like a platform and like an audience to say it to. I think that in pursuit of that, I came to realize pretty quickly that I didn't need to leave. I didn't need to leave Ohio in order to get that. I mean, at the time I didn't. I still technically don't need to be here in order for me to be successful. I guess maybe in a traditional kind of way, if I wanted to get signed to a label, like, yeah, there are all the label buildings here or whatever, but I think it's more about like who are you affecting and like what your audience is like, right? Like, do they actually connect with you? How large is your audience? You could build like a hometown following and, you can never leave your state, you can never leave your city, and you can still like make a living off of music. And for me, it's never been about the fame per se. Like, of course, everybody wants like their Tonight Show moment where they like walk out and like, have your walkout song or whatever. Acknowledgement
is a special thing.
Yeah,
it's not like this base vice thing. It's like it's a real. I mean, in the little bit of acknowledgement that I've received, like it's another one of these kind of sacred spaces where it's like, damn, I did not know that anybody gave a shit.
Yeah.
It's very special.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And in a lot of ways it's validation that is necessary for you to kind of have closure on your project, because a lot of times as creatives we lock ourselves into these spaces that you're creating in almost kind of like a vacuum.
Yeah.
Where you'll be alone in a room with, either yourself or like a small group of people, a very small group of people. You'll be working on this thing for so long. You listen to so many different versions, so many different mixes, and you'll beat this thing until you don't want to hear it anymore. And then the first time that somebody else hears it and then they give you that response that you were looking for, it's like, this made me think of this, which was the whole point of you making that piece of art to begin with. It was like, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, that's profound.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. So maybe we could end on a quote, because that's what every high school English teacher says you're supposed to do. But this is I'm gonna have you read this one if you don't mind.
Okay.
This is from the final blog entry on your website.
Yeah.
That I just thought it's a beautifully profound statement.
Yeah. So actually, and it's funny because we were talking about this a little bit earlier about the gray spaces and whatnot.
Yeah.
But so in the blog I said, you see, life exists mostly in the gray areas, not the yin or yang, not the conservative or liberal, not the real hip hop or the mumble rap. It's the path that takes you through growth, true growth, the shit that scares you, the shit that makes you question yourself, challenges your belief for the betterment of yourself and humanity.
Solid.
Yeah.
So maybe one more time. The record is called Excuses, and it can be found
on ajcrew.com and excuses.ajcrew.com.
And it's an amazing record. It really is.
Oh, thank you, man.
Feel very privileged to have been a part of it.
I appreciate you, man.
That's a wrap.
Yeah.